Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and today I have this model kit, a white M3 Halftrack that was given to me by the Manchester Nerfer. Thank you very much. And that's quite interesting because a little while ago I made this, the M3 Halftrack by Italeri. So today I can compare the Airfix kit to the Italeri one. The interesting thing here is that this is 1:56 scale, as Italeri often make, because they're making stuff for bolt action. Not all they do, but that's a common thing that they do. Whereas this kit is in 1:76 scale. And seeing that it's 1:76 was a little bit odd, because it's not a very common scale, certainly not anymore. And when I opened up the box and I saw that the sprues were this kind of odd, old-fashioned style, where they have a central part of the sprue, but they don't have that kind of border of sprue, the kind of the frame that we're used to in modern kits, but even kind of quite old kits have that. And so I went to looking around and I found Scalemates, a website that keeps track of Airfix kits amongst other things, the reboxings of kits, and when the original tooling for the kits was made. So in this case I can look at the M3A1 Halftrack, and I can see that the box that I have looks very much like, there we go, the 2008 release of this particular kit. However, if we scroll back, all the way back in time, we can find that the new tooling, when the mould was originally made for this kit, was in 1966. And that makes this a very old kit. But that's not going to stop me from putting it together, so let's do that so that we can compare it to the new one. The sprues are surprisingly not terrible, especially for an over 50-year-old tooling. The parts are kind of thin-ish and quite soft, but there is very good detail, and the mould lines are, for the most part, reasonable and in places that will disappear on the final model. We will start with the front wheels on their axle, which can be fitted in a way that lets them move, but I felt keeping them rigid would mean that they're a little stronger and would last a bit longer. I think that the hubcap is supposed to sit inside the wheel, but I couldn't get any of them to fit, and so they all kind of stick out a little more than I think they should. On the underside of the chassis goes some parts of the exhaust, and then the front axles and the tracks as one solid piece. There is handily an upside down picture in the instructions that makes it quite clear where the parts should go, and something more kits should do. Starting to build the body, I noticed that there are some sprue injection points that aren't actually on the sprue, rather on the parts, and they're in places that are going to be visible on the inside of the cab when the model is finished, and so I tried to shave those down. Then I noticed that in the rear armoured compartment there are markings on the sides that are also going to be visible in the final model. Well, I guess the interior just wasn't a big deal in the 60s. All of the armour panels went onto the base pretty easily, and with slight ledges on the parts, it was fairly easy to work out where they were supposed to go, and they held in place nicely. However, once I got to the front, I wasn't always sure whether to put the ledge of any given part on the inside or outside, and this was especially annoying for the bonnet, which I ended up pulling out of place and putting back in several times, because I just wasn't sure which way was correct. There's a tow hook for the back, and just 2 seats for the transport compartment. The mine racks go on the side. They are empty, which is fine, but strangely this one actually has an air bubble leaving a gap, and it's very rare that you see an air bubble in a polystyrene kit. I've had probably 5 in my entire 20 years of model making, and they're even rarer with the modern kind of thermal calculations and digital processing that goes into making modern moulding. As this is the only real serious fault with the kit, I'm not going to be too harsh on it. The machine gun cupola goes on in a couple of pieces and can be positioned at different angles. I've just fixed mine facing forwards. Each front wheel gets a wheel arch thingy, and they both have holes for headlights. Some jerry cans go on the side, and one of these does have a sink mark, which you could call another fault if you really want to, but it's a fairly thick piece of plastic, and that is often where sink marks like this form. And that's why usually in more modern kits, in even kind of what now would be considered older kits, you don't really get these thick parts anymore. We can then put the chassis and armoured top together and we're nearly complete. There's a winch or cable trum thing that goes onto the front in a few tiny pieces that, whilst they do line up, have very little support, and so you kind of have to nudge them around until it's aligned and wait for the cement to set. This kit also comes with a trailer, which was pretty easy to assemble. The main box is 4 parts that you fit around the axle, and the canvas top is just a single hollow piece. The wheels are very similar to the Halftrack's front wheels, and the hubcaps didn't fit here either, so I just glued everything solid. And there's just this tiny little supporting wheel for when it's unhitched, and that's done as well. With it built, let's put some paint on. Now I went through the box and there was some paints in there. However, since 2008, when this particular one was boxed, they have all dried out. These pots are not particularly airtight. All except for one. Luckily, the dark green, which would actually be very handy to use. I carefully added some water and mixed it around for a good few minutes to try and revive it to a state where I could put it through my airbrush. And that did work, but it came out quite thin. Maybe I added a bit too much water. And to add a little modulation highlight, I added a more modern light green paint, mixed that in, and that was all I needed to do with airbrush, so I got back to a real brush, and I used exclusively my normal modern paints rather than the kind of 12-year, 15-year-old ones in the kit. But I will also dig into the box for the transfer sheet, and the instructions handily have the locations marked. Again, more kits should do this. Unfortunately, the transfers themselves are horrid. They barely stuck to the model, even when everything was dry. They peeled and flaked, and on top of that they were so glossy that my usual matte varnish that I put over to kind of seal transfers in didn't even stick. Well, I wasn't planning on spending a terribly long time painting the model anyway, so I got stuck in with some simple stipple weathering, dark brown, black, some light grey as well, to show dirt, damage and bare metal under the paint chips. And as I had the brown out, I also used that for the trailer's canvas. With the tracks getting some silver, as well as the radiator and machine gun, and just a couple of brown features, mainly the seats, I went ahead and added a ink wash, which is essentially how I often paint larger wargaming models, the vehicles and the armoured suits. But for a quick expedient paint job, it works quite well at this scale as well. And you can see here that even the wash didn't stick to the transfers. And to finish up, as I often do, a subtle edge highlight of that lighter green. And so there is the 1:76 scale Airfix kit of the M3 Halftrack. And whilst this is a very old kit, it's actually a fairly nice kit to build. There are a few problems with it, such as the pretty terrible detail on the inside, the part numbers being visible and there only being 2 seats. And there are a couple of fitment issues with the bonnet that maybe I could have worked out if I'd have spent a bit longer over it. But if I compare it to my M3 Halftrack from Italeri in the larger 1:56 scale, it actually holds up surprisingly well. And obviously I'm going to ignore the crew figures for the Italeri and the trailer for the Airfix, as I don't have the opposed parts to compare those. Given that the Italeri kit is a larger scale, you expect there to be more detail on it. But on the other hand, the Airfix kit is a model maker's kit, not a gaming kit, and so you would expect that to have more detail. And so actually it balances out, and they end up on the outside having very similar detail. The rivets, the bolts, the door handles, the hinges even on all of the hatches and the bonnet, they're all very similar. There are some differences in the armor panels, and so one has a ridge here and the other one has like a panel maybe, and I'm not sure if that's to do with there being different versions of the M3 Halftrack. I'm not an expert, or if things were changed during the production run of this vehicle in real life. But having those differences, I don't see that as a positive or negative for either one. Another similarity between these is the way that they went together, and again that's to do with the real vehicle. This kind of open topped with the armor panels just lends it to be put together kind of one flat armor panel at a time. And both of the kits have the track sections as one complete piece, whereas maybe a more modern display model kit might have those with a lot more pieces, where you put together the wheels and the bogies and the suspension separately. But all told, I think that this is actually a pretty decent kit. For something that's so old, on the outside it looks great in the scale that it's in, and I've only done a really basic paint job on it. Kind of the modulation in the green, some stippling for weathering, and a wash. That's all I've done. Oh, and the edge highlight. The only disappointing part of the final model would actually be the interior, but it wouldn't necessarily be hard to kit bash or even digitally sculpt and print out some benches that would go on the side. Maybe replace the jerry cans as well if you found that was an issue. Otherwise, it's a pretty nice kit, and given that this kit is relatively cheap even now, it's not a terrible option. But for now, I'm going to put this back with my bolt action stuff, and I need to work out what to do with the 1/76 version, because this is the only model I actually own in 1/76 scale. Maybe it can sit on a shelf and look pretty, I guess. But with all that said, thank you very much for watching and having a look at these two vehicles, particularly the Airfix kit. It's quite an interesting one to have a look at. I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.